This is the first tutorial for project number 2, and we are going to work with files that are located on the drive. And if you've downloaded the desktop version of Drive, you can see them in your class documents folder, Photoshop, O2 Photoshop demo, and there's 3 files in that folder. Okay, and if you're using the online version of Drive, you can also find this O2 Photoshop demo file and then download each of these 3 files individually. Okay, so once you have those files, you should locate them onto your flash drive. So I'm going to select the first one, and then I'm going to shift click and select the last one. So now I have all 3 selected, and I'm going to drag them into my flash drive, and it copies them onto my flash drive. So I can close out that window. And now I already have Photoshop open, but you don't necessarily have to. But what you want to do is you want to shift click these 3 files, drag them to the Photoshop icon, and let go. And then they should open up in Photoshop, and you'll see a tab for each one. So sky, object, and setting. Alright, and so we're going to use setting as our base file. One of the things that's really important in creating collages and montages or combining images in Photoshop is to make sure that you are making them, that the original files that you're using are going to be large enough to print at the size that you need them to print. And so first off, I'm going to show you how to check that out. And since the setting is going to be the biggest one, and then we're going to place these other 2 files into the setting file, this is the one we're going to want to check the file size. And you'll want to do this on your own files that you download if you're choosing the collage route for your movie poster. Okay. Actually, a little side note on how to find images that are good enough quality for your collage poster. If you open up a web browser, preferably Chrome, and you search something like house, and then you go to images, so now you're in Google Images, and it's showing you all these different houses. And if you hover over the images, you can see actually what size the pixel dimensions are. And the like this house is 5,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels approximately, and that's going to be quite large, and that's going to be large enough to make a file with, whereas this one is only 500 by 600, and this is not going to be large enough. So you want to make sure that your document is at least 3,000 pixels in one direction, preferably both directions. Okay. Now, if I was going to use this house, but I was going to use it as a vertical composition, so I was actually going to crop the sides off, I would actually want to make sure that it definitely was 3,000 pixels tall and more than 3,000 pixels wide, because otherwise it will not be large enough to use for the project. Okay. Sometimes, like with these house pictures, for some reason all these first top hits are quite large, and that's great, but that's not always going to be the case. So what you can do is, if you go to Tools, and then you have these other options that come up, and you click on Size, and you go Larger Than, and then you select 4 megapixels here, where it says 2,000 by 1,000. Still, some of those won't be large. Let's see. Oh, we can scroll down. Okay, so maybe 8 megapixels. Those ones will for sure be large enough. The 6 megapixels maybe will be. So if we're having a hard time finding an image we want, maybe choose 6, and that should be good. Now it's going to only show me images that are going to be large enough for me to use. If I wanted this house to be very small in the background of my image, I wouldn't need it to be 3,000. The 3,000 rule is simply for images that are going to take up the entirety of your screen, or the entirety of your poster when you print it. So that's a little note about making sure that you're downloading the right files. But then once you have it in Photoshop, you can also double check this by going to File, or sorry, image size, and that's going to show you the width and height of this image. So this image is just barely big enough to be the right size. Also, I'm noting that the resolution is at 300, and I'm going to actually deselect resample and change the resolution to 180. Okay, and then that shows me how many inches I can print this document at. And so that shows me that I can print it at about 16.7, which is perfect because the end result that I want for my movie poster is a tabloid sized piece of paper, which is 17 inches by 11 inches. Okay, so this document is just the right size in order for me to print it off at tabloid. So I'm going to press OK here. And it doesn't seem like anything's changed, but it's just showing me how many pixels I have available, and that now my document will print off at the right size. If you don't end up changing, like if you don't do that step or you don't change it, the print shop will think that you want a document that's maybe smaller or larger than you want it to be, and sometimes they'll print it off at weird sizes. So you always want to make sure that your document dimensions, so image size, is about the size that you want it here. Okay, and that the size that we want is 17 by 11. Okay, so that's our first video tutorial on image sizing and making sure that your document is the right image size. For the first part, we're going to talk about different ways that you can cut and paste things from one image to the other. So I want you to click on the Object tab so you can see this image in front of you. And there's going to be a few different types of selections that we're going to use. Some of them will seem a little bit ridiculous for the image result, but I just want to see that you're able to use them, because selecting an image or parts of an image is very important to creating documents in Photoshop. So the first selection tool that we're going to talk about is the rectangular selection tool. And if I go over to my toolbar, it's going to be on the right hand side, and it probably will be the top one, but it looks like a little rectangle that's made out of dotted lines. And if it's not showing up, if you click and hold your mouse, you'll be able to see it and select it from the drop down menu. Okay. And what I want you to do is just click and drag out a rectangle someplace in the blue part of the image. And then what we're going to do is we're going to press Command C to copy. Then we're going to go over to our setting page, and we're going to press Command V to paste it. And now you'll see that that little part of the selection, and now I just click back to my little move arrow here, so I can kind of just put it somewhere in your document. Okay, so that's the rectangular selection tool. Now I have this area selected and I don't want it selected anymore, so I'm going to press Command D to deselect it. And then I'm going to use a different selection tool. I'm going to click and hold and grab the elliptical marquee tool, which I can grab if you wanted to maybe cut out a quarter or something like that. Right? And you're going to click and drag out an ellipse. Notice that the ellipse is flexible in both dimensions, but if I hold the Shift key, it's actually going to make a perfect circle. Okay, and that's what I want. Alright, so I'm going to hold the Shift key and drag out a perfect circle. The other thing that might be useful is if you, while I'm still holding the Shift key and the clicker button on my mouse, I can also hold down the space bar and move this around. Okay, so if I realize, like, as I'm dragging it out that it's not matching up properly, I can, and now this is there's three different fingers involved here. I've got a clicker on my mouse, clicker on my, or finger on my Shift key, and a finger on my space bar, and then you can drag it around. And you want to drag it someplace and select a circle, and I want to let go of, in order, the spacebar key, then my mouse, then the Shift key, so it doesn't accidentally squish that circle. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press Command C to copy, and then I'm going to go to my setting, and I'm going to press Command V to paste. All right, and then I'm going to go to my move arrow, and I'm going to move that someplace in my document, just to show that I know how to create a perfect circle. Okay, not because it looks that great. All right, so then the two other selection tools we're going to talk about is one is the lasso tool, and there's the free lasso where I can just draw a weird shape by just clicking and dragging my mouse around. And I'm going to press Command C to copy and then Command V to paste. Go to my move tool, relocate that object someplace, and go back to my object. I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to go into my polygon lasso tool. And now this tool we're actually going to use to select a shape, because there's a shape in here that this tool would be very good for. And what you do is you're going to click somewhere on your document in the corner of a shape that you want to select, and I'm just going to keep clicking along, and I'm going to try to select out this shape here. Now once I get back to the beginning where I started, I'll see that little circle show up, and then I know I've completed my shape. Okay, if I ever click somewhere and I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't actually want to click there, if I press escape, it's going to actually undo that point that I made. Okay, so escape will always get you out of the most recent point that you made. Okay, so I can press escape, it will go away, and then it'll bring this back up. Okay, so then I'm going to press Command C to copy, go to my setting, Command V to paste. Go to my move tool, relocate this someplace, maybe on the edge here, because then it's chopping off the awkward edge there. That looks good. Okay, so that's the polygon lasso. And then the other one is the magnetic lasso, but we're actually not going to use that one because we are, well, I'll show you how to use it. But there's a better tool now that you'll be more likely to use than the magnetic lasso. But the magnetic lasso, it sort of finds the edge of the shape that you're looking for. Okay, so you can use it to kind of drag around. And it only works well if the object that you're trying to select is distinctly visually different from the background that surrounds it. So in this case, this pink water bottle is very different from the blue table, and so that's why the magnetic lasso worked pretty quickly right away. Okay, so something that happened though, and I'm going to press Command plus to zoom in, and I'm going to hold my space bar down while I reposition my window, and I can see that, like, I don't know, something happened right here, maybe because of this book that's on the table. It made it so it didn't select that correctly. And it also selected weirdly across the top. So these are actually all straight lines here, so I'm actually gonna, instead of the magnetic lasso, I'm gonna switch back to the polygon lasso. The important thing to note here is that you can actually use multiple selection tools to make one single selection. But if I just click, it's going to get rid of everything I did. So I'm not clicking my mouse just yet, and what I'm doing is I'm holding my shift key, and you'll see that little plus sign come up, and I'm actually going to circle around that shape. Something that's a little weird is because the shift key does two things. It adds to the selection, but it also makes your line just go straight up and down and vertical. So what you need to do actually is just tap the shift key, start making the line, and then you can let go and kind of freeform grab this shape here. Oops. It made my shape go away, but I'm just pressing Command Z and then it comes back. Because I just got a little too excited and I clicked one too many times, which then made it think I was starting a new selection. So now I have this shape selected, and I can press Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste. And you'll see that it pasted in there. Again, I'm going to kind of put it up in the corner up here because we're making some kind of weird surrealist scene here. When I put it up in the blue sky, I noticed there is a little extra hair there. Something I can do, and this is what you would do in the circumstance that we're using here where it's a copy and paste method. I will later on in this tutorial show you how to create a mask, which then it's a different strategy for getting rid of a little thing that sticks out like that. But since we copied and pasted, we can zoom in, Command plus, 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 space bar to reposition, and then I'm going to use the polygon lasso tool to select that edge here. So I'm selecting just like that little thing, and then out here it doesn't matter as much because what I'm doing is I'm just going to erase this shape, and this shape only exists right here. It doesn't actually exist over here. There's nothingness over here. Okay, and then I'm going to go in my toolbar to the eraser tool here, just single click on it. This eraser tool is 2, 4, 6 down on the left hand side. Okay, and then I can just erase that little teeny blip that was sticking out. Okay, and then I can press Command D to deselect. I can press Command minus to zoom out, and now that looks pretty good. Okay, and so that's what we're going for. I really want you to zoom in and trim up the edges and make it look really, really well crafted. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the object file. I'm really zoomed in here, so I'm going to press Command minus to zoom out. I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and now I'm going to grab this rope using the tool that you'll probably use the most often, which is the quick selection tool, okay, which is over here. And I am going to, for some reason mine is on minus right now, and I can tell that because there's a little minus sign in the middle of my circle. I'm going to click on the plus, and I'm just going to drag out within that shape, and what it's doing is it's kind of starting to detect the edge, so it works in a similar way to the magnetic lasso tool. It's just a little bit, the magnetic lasso tool can be a little finicky as far as like just selecting too much, and it's hard to get it to deselect it. So now you'll see that I've dragged out too much, okay? And so what I'm going to do now is select the minus up here and drag so that I subtract from my selection back down to kind of try to grab that edge. Now I'm going to go back to the plus, and I can click and drag out. Now let's see it dragged out too far, so I'm going to subtract from that. Okay, and I'm really trying to get it to go very, very close to the edge here. The other thing is this, we don't want this blue, right? That's the table, and if we're putting it into a new scene, we actually want to get rid of that. And so I can actually just click inside of that, and it does a pretty good job of subtracting that. I could also subtract that, but then it subtracted too much. So now I'm going to add that back, add this back, and I'm just going to keep going back and forth with adding and subtracting until I'm clicking all along the way here. Okay, if my brush is too big over here, because kind of to get into some of these areas it's a little too large, I can click on this brush up here, click and hold on the little arrow, drag the size down to smaller, and then that's pretty good for the smaller areas. It is harder to see which one I'm doing, minusing or plussing, right? So I'm going to drag that along. I'm clicking and dragging as I go and trying to get a really good selection, right? Maybe I want to subtract a little from there too. Oh, and then we'll add that back. Okay, and so I'm trying to do a really nice job of selecting, what I want and making sure that I don't have selected what I don't want. Okay. It's always better to take too much than it is to take too little, right? Because we can always remember how I showed you with the water bottle. You can always erase a little bit extra, but you can't ever bring back something. That's the disadvantage of the crop and paste method, or copy and paste method, is that you can't get back the pixels that you deleted. So you want to make sure you at least have everything you want, and you can always erase a little bit later. Okay. So once I've got that, I might want to Command plus, kind of zoom in, subtract a little maybe here, add a little here. Oh, then I got too much. Now I'll subtract a little bit. Okay, but keep going. I'm holding the spacebar key so I can reposition this, kind of check out the edges, make sure there's no other spaces that I want to just click a little bit, add to. All right, Command minus, I can zoom out. All right, and now I'm ready. So I'm going to press Command C to copy, and then I'm going to press Command V to paste. And then I'm going to use my move tool to move that into position. Okay, and so those are all of the different selection tools that you might use. One last one that I want to talk about is the color range tool. That one is not particularly useful for the document that we're working on, but I've found that a lot of students have used this one in their project, so I wanted to show that to you as well. So I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to, this one's in a drop-down menu, so I'm going to go to Select, Color Range, and then I can actually, when I drag my cursor out onto my document, it will turn into an eyedropper, and I can click on a particular color. So I could select, that might be a nice easy way to select the water bottle. Okay, and so once I have an initial selection that's showing me pretty much everything is selected in this little black and white version of it, I can add to my selection a little bit, because like this isn't quite working here, and then I can try subtracting from my document as well. You'll see that this isn't working terribly great, because some of the colors in the bubbles are similar to colors that are like on the table or in the shadow under the ball of rope. But you might find this tool useful for other things. So if you press OK, then it will select the area that it told you it was going to select, and I can press Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste. And you'll see that that kind of, I don't know, that kind of did a funky thing, right? So it's this more of this like textured, weird looking object, which maybe you'd want for some kind of interesting texture to add to it. But it can also be useful if you were trying to delete like the blue background. So you have a person and they're standing against a blue sky, and you'd want to just have the person. You could select the blue sky and delete it, and then move them to the new document. So that might be a useful tool to use. All right. So those are all the different ways that you can select an object and then copy and paste it into a new document. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a mask. And a mask will start out being similar to how we copied and pasted elements from one document to another, but there'll be two key differences. One in what button we press in order to make the mask occur, and then two in how the mask is edited later in order to fine-tune the edges of the document. So creating a mask is important because it has a little bit more flexibility, like I discussed earlier. And so you may find that this is a better way to put two images or more together into a single document. So what we're going to be doing in this document is actually using a mask to get rid of the sky here and replace it with this other sky in this other tab here. Okay, so we're going to give it a kind of darker, more wispy sky. So we're going to click back to our PSD document. And the first thing I'm going to do, because these objects in here are kind of distracting and they're going to get in the way of me being able to see what's happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to my layers panel and I'm going to click on the eyeballs here to make them all invisible. So these layers are all still there, but I just can't see them. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the lock icon here so that the the bottom layer, my background layer here, is not locked. Okay, so that's going to be important for later. All right, so those are two things I'm going to start off doing in my layers panel. So then what you do in order to create a mask is first you have to select out the area that you want to create the mask of. And we're going from here to here, down to here, up to here. And so see if you can guess what selection tool would be the best for this area. So if you thought that it was the polygon lasso tool, you're correct. So this will be a good space to use the polygon lasso tool for. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to click at the corner here. If you drag your mouse all the way to the other corner, you'll notice that the building actually goes up above that line. And that's a result of the curvature of the camera lens curving the building slightly. Okay, and so what we're going to need to do, since we're using the polygon lasso tool, is put a point here and maybe another point here and then go down here, and that will confine to that top roof of that building a little bit better. And I'm just clicking along one click at a time, trying to get as close to the edge as possible, and I'm looking for the edge of the sky shape there. Notice I have to click around a lot. You can kind of hear my mouse clicking. I have to click around a lot in those trees because the polygon lasso tool isn't necessarily the best tool for that area, but since it's so small, we can just we'll be able to edit that space using the brush tool, the paintbrush tool later. Okay, now I'm going to click around the outside here, and I'm not going to be too careful. I'm just going to make sure that I'm on the outside edge of the sky, so I'm not just leaving like a hair of sky that's not selected. And then I went back to the beginning where I first started, which then is what it made it show the marching ants or the marquee that's scrolling around them. Okay, so now I have this area selected, but when creating a mask, it actually makes invisible all of the things that are not selected. So that means that we actually have to select the opposite of what we have selected, because right now we have the sky selected, but we want to actually make the sky invisible, so we want the building selected. So that's an easy one-click solution. If you click on select and then go down to inverse, it'll select the opposite of what you have. Okay, so now we have a perfectly nice selection of our building here. And since we're using the masking method, we're not going to press Command C and Command V, but instead we're going to create a mask. And so what that is if you go down to your layers panel, you'll see a rectangle with a circle inside of it. And if you click just once on that, you'll see this little black and white icon show up. Your marquee line will have disappeared and your sky will have turned totally white. Okay. In order for that to work properly, I needed to make sure that I was selected on the proper layer. If I had been selected on like layer 2, for example, which was one of my objects that I can't even see right now, this mask wouldn't have worked. Okay, so I need to make sure that I have this layer highlighted before I press the rectangular button with the circle inside of it. Okay, if you ever make a mistake, again, you can go to Window, History, and then you'll see everything you've done to the document since you've opened it up, and you could actually click back one step, make sure you're selected on the proper layer, and then press the Make Layer Mask button. Okay, So that's how you make a mask. But nothing too exciting is happening just yet because we don't have our other sky in this document yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the tab to go to the sky layer. And just as a side note, this way that I'm showing you how to put one document into the other document is the way that I want you to do this all the time for any project you do for this class. I am aware that if you click and drag on an icon on your desktop right into a document, it will show up there, but it will have that little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your picture, which for this class, we are not wanting our documents to be imported in that way. We want them to actually all be placed in the document itself and not just referenced. So just if that was a little bit confusing, don't worry about it too much. Just make sure you're doing it the way that I'm showing you right now and you're not coming up with your own way to do it. So what you want to do is click on the Move tool, which is the top right here. And we're going to click, and I'm clicking in somewhere in my image, and I'm holding down my clicker right now. I'm still holding down the clicker finger on my mouse. I'm dragging up to my other document. I'm still holding on my clicker, and I'm dragging down into the workspace. And then finally, I let go of my clicker. If you let go too soon, it will drop your document and it won't put it into your final place. So then you'll just need to go back and try it over again, okay? This is not actually what we want, right? We want the sky to actually be underneath the building so it only peeks out in the particular areas we want it to. So what we're gonna do for that, and if you are sort of catching on to Photoshop a little bit, you may know this already, but you're gonna drag layer 9 under layer 0 here, under my sky layer, under my building layer. And then since I'm in the Move tool, I can actually move, and I'm gonna get my history panel out of the way right now. I can actually move the sky around and kind of pick out which part of the sky I think works best. And this is one of the benefits of working with a mask, is you can have a little bit more freedom as far as how the two documents interact with one another, okay? So the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to edit this document so that it looks good, because down in here it's not as believable, right? It doesn't have very good craftsmanship. Along this edge is pretty good. Maybe I could do a little bit of cleanup up here, but this looks pretty good along here. But I'm trying to get rid of that halo effect that's happening here. Okay, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the paintbrush tool to do that, not the eraser tool. The eraser tool is what I would use if I had cut and paste an object into this, but since I'm working with masks, I need to use the paintbrush tool. Okay, I also need to make sure that I'm selected on the proper thing over here in my layers panel. Okay, right now I'm selected on layer 9, and that's not what I want. I want to actually be selected on the mask portion of layer 0, okay? Not the image here, the mask portion here, okay? And so then I'm going to go over to my paintbrush, and your swatches are probably still set up like this, with black as your foreground and white as your background. And what black does is, if I paint with black on here, it's actually subtracting area from where my mask is, okay? And so I'm going to press Command Z to undo that. But what I want is I want to add a little bit to my masked area to get rid of this halo. And so what I can do is I can click on these little arrows right here, which will switch my foreground color to white. And now I'll be able to, nope, you know what, sorry, I do want black. I'm going to press Command Z and back up a little bit. Oh, but I can't back up to where I want, so I'm going to click on the history up here, and I'm going to go back to before I painted with my brush strokes. Okay, then I'm going to close out my history panel. So I actually do want to be painting on this with black, okay? But now, wait, why is it turning black? Because I'm actually selected on layer 9, because when I undid that, it brought me back to when I was selected on layer 9. So if you ever have a moment where you paint on your document and there's actually a black streak that shows up, that means you're selected on the wrong place, okay? So you want to press Command Z to undo, and you want to make sure you're selected in the right place, and now it's going to work, okay? I'm actually going to press Command Z to undo that, and I'm going to zoom way in. So I'm going to press Command plus, plus, plus. I'm going to hold down my space bar, reposition, and then I'm going to check out this area, okay? Similar to what we did when we were erasing a little bit of that water bottle before, I'm going to actually use the lasso tool to create a nice little guideline for myself here, because it will only paint in the area that I have selected, and so that can help me get a nice crisp edge. And I'm actually just making sure that I'm right on the inside, because it's okay if I paint a touch of the building off, but it's not okay if I have like not enough space, because then there's that light blue halo that we're seeing. Okay, so I made a circle, a guideline. I'm getting my paintbrush and double checking that I'm highlighted on the right place. I am. So I can paint on here like that. I can press Command D to deselect, and that looks pretty good. Okay. Now the second place that I'm gonna edit is actually around the trees here. And with the trees, I want to have a nice feathered edge. And so what I need to do is go up to my brush panel here, and you might have to decrease the size of your brush because it might still be really big from when we made the shadow. So maybe like 25 or something, and turn the hardness way down. Okay, that gives it a nice feathered edge here. Okay, and now when I paint along here, you can see that it's doing a really soft blending from the sky to the tree, which helps it to look a little bit more realistic. You can also tap along. You can click and drag to paint, or you can tap. And so I'm going to just keep kind of tapping around so that it makes that tree look like it's really there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If I press Command minus and zoom out from a distance, that looks great. If it's something really tiny, you always want to zoom out, make sure that it looks good enough. And so that's a fairly believable composite image that we've created using a mask. So you're going to go to File, Save As, and you're going to title the document last name underscore first name O2 PS-A. And then you're going to click Save and click OK. And the place that you're going to save your document is going to be in the Turn In O2 Workshops PSA folder. So that's where you'll put this document once you have exported it as a JPEG document and made sure that it is named properly.